Welcome back to PHP Fundamentals, and in today's lesson we're going to review the homework that was assigned in the lesson Manipulating File Names. So if we scroll down to the bottom, here was the homework. Given the file path images/myfile.txt, show me 3 different ways to specifically capture the string myfile and store it within a variable. Okay, let's work through this together. I've created a new folder called Homework Solutions, and first let's chart out what we need to do. So the first point was, given the file path, and we called it images/my-file.txt, show me 3 different ways to capture the string my-file. Finally, we need to store that result within a variable called filename. Store result in filename. Okay, so now we have the objective. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to begin with the official solution, and this would be the technique that I would use in my projects, and then we will slowly take a look at around 3 other options that are less than ideal, but still good to know. All right, so the official way, how would I do this in my projects? Well, we've created this file path, so now I will create a new variable called file_name, and I'm going to use the path info function that we reviewed in the Manipulating File Names lesson. In this case, we pass in the path. That's going to return an array containing information about the path we provided. And in this case, all I want to return is the file name. So I'm going to use path_info_filename as the second parameter. And now when I echo filename and I run this, sure enough, we get my-file. All right, so that's the official way. Now let's take a look at a couple of alternate ways that you could do this as well. Here's another idea. We could use base name, which we also reviewed in the last lesson. So if I provide base name and then file path, let's see what happens when I echo file name. If I run that, now we get the actual file.txt. However, base name, as I noted in the previous lesson, also provides you with the ability to provide a second parameter, which will essentially be whatever gets stripped off that. So in this case, I will set .txt, and what that's going to do is strip off anything that we set as the second parameter. Now if I run it again, we get my-file. Good, so that's another way, and that would be just as fine as using path info. At this point, it comes down to what you consider to be more readable, more expressive. In this case, I think that version is more readable because it's very clear that I'm getting the file name and storing it within a variable. Whereas in this case, I have to do a little bit more thinking to determine what that second parameter does. All right, so I'm going to give these headings, and we'll say number 2, number 1. Next, let's do number 3. And this time, why don't we treat it as an array? And this might be something that you would do if you were not aware of the base name and path info functions. However, it's not something that we've covered just yet. So let me give you an example. We'll create once again that variable file name, but this time I'm going to use this new explode function. There's also the inverse, which is implode. So the way explode works is it will take a string that you provided. So in this case, our string is going to be file path. And what it's going to do is it's going to split that string into items within an array. And the way that it determines what part of the string goes within each item is based on the delimiter. So in this case, if I were to set it to /, what it's going to do is separate this string according to every time it finds a /. So think about it. It starts here, then it finds a /, so that will immediately be the new item. So then that will separate the string into an array with images as the first item and myfile.txt as the second. Or as another example, if I set explode to period, then it would set the first item in the array as images/myfile, and then txt as the second item. And notice that period is the delimiter. It never ends up anywhere in the array. That's what's used as the separator. In our case, though, I'm going to return it to /, and let's print our file name just to make sure we're on the right track. Yes, now we have an array. And the one we want in this case is myfile.txt. We want the very end. So there's a couple ways that we could grab that value. First, we could do echo file name and then 1 to get the first item. Remember, arrays are 0-based. If I run it, now we have myfile.txt. Another way would be to run explode and then from there get the first item within the array. If I run it, now we're getting the same thing. Now another way would be to use the end function. And in this case, we're going to pass this return value by reference. So what's probably going to happen, and it may or may not happen on your computer dependent upon your settings, in the php.ini file. In my case, yep, I'm going to get this PHP strict standards. And what it's telling us is that only variables should be passed by reference as a best practice. However, if I scroll down, you'll see it is working. We're just taking the output of this function and passing it to end. And what end will do is return the very last item within the array. Now, if this is something you absolutely want to do and you want to suppress any warnings like that, a technique you can use, but be very careful with this. In general, try not to use it at all. If you precede it with an @, that is a suppressor. So if I run it again, that's going to suppress any warnings that you might receive. However, in this case, for now, let's go back to what we had before, where we got the first item within the array. But that's still not enough. We're still getting .txt. So this time we will use substring. And if you remember, substring allows us to return a subsection of a string. So in our case, where do we begin? We're going to begin at 0, or the very first character in that string. And we want to end at -4 because I want to chop off txt period from the very end. So if I set -4, it's going to remove anything from the end. Now if I run it, we get my-file. So that's a slightly more intensive, less readable way. Compare this option to using pathinfo and being very explicit about pathinfo_filename. Nonetheless, that's one way to do it. And let's take a look at maybe one last one today. We'll do file name, and this time I'll show you how to use preg replace. And this is how you can do essentially search and replace, but with regular expressions. But before we do that, let's instead use string replace. So if I write out this function, you can see what it accepts is what we are searching for, what we are replacing whatever we find with, and then finally, what are we working with? So I'll give you an example. We're going to look for txt, we're going to replace that with nothing, and what is the subject? File path. So this translates to working with the file path variable, look for the string .txt, and replace anything that you've matched with nothing. So let's try this out. Echo file name, and if I run it, now we get images / my-file. So in this case, we could also do file name. Once again, explode that using a /, and we're working with file path. And now we can say we're working with end file name. And if I run it, now we're getting my-file. Because this time we're taking the file path, we're turning it into an array again, and then we are running our string replace on my-file.txt. Now, if you wanted to do the same thing with regular expressions instead, you could copy this, change it to preg replace, and the only difference is this time you can use regular expressions. So I could use case insensitivity and then look for .txt at the very end of the string. And that way I can be sure that we're not matching anything in the wrong location. I'm looking for .txt at the very end of the string that we provided. Then one more time, if I run it, now we're getting that. So once again, as you can see, for any given task, there's lots of different ways to solve it. And while all of them will give you the same solution, it's up to you as the developer to determine what is the most readable. When you come back to this project in 6 months, are you going to be able to understand what that does? Maybe so, maybe not. But more importantly, this version is easily the most readable. We pass it the path, we return some information related to that path, and specifically we want to return the file name. And in my opinion, that's infinitely more readable than using a mixture of functions as we've done right here. And that's the fun part of being a developer, is figuring out the best way to solve a particular problem. And that's where you get to be creative. So tonight, what I want you to do is play around with this explode function. There's explode, and its inverse implode. Now what implode will do is the opposite. So implode will take an array and turn it into a string. I'll give you a quick example of that. If we echo, and let's create an array of names, Jeff, Collis, Tash, Amanda, and now I'm going to run this through the implode function like this. With explode, we are passing a string, but with implode, we're going to take this array and turn it into a string. So what will be the delimiter? And this can be anything we can set it to. How about we set it to a space, a pipe, and another space, like that. Now if I run it, we're going to get a string, but now it's taken each item in the array and separated them with the pipe. Or if you wanted to do a comma, like that, that works as well. So have a play with explode and implode, try to commit those to memory, figure out how you could use them in your projects. And as always, I will be back tomorrow with the next lesson of PHP fundamentals. My name's Jeffrey Way, and I'll see you later. Bye.